evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Festival of Europe from Rick Steves. I'm Lisa Friend, and I'm delighted as always to be your moderator this evening. Tonight, our show is chock full of great travel advice and is especially timely as we have two European travel experts with us to share their travel predictions and solutions for this coming year. Now, please join me in welcoming our guests, Robyn Stencil and Cameron Hewitt. Welcome, Robyn, and welcome, Cameron.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Lisa.
I'm so happy you're here tonight. Now, Robyn and Cameron, we've all worked together for a very long time, worked for Rick Steves for a very long time, and we've all guided tours, but you both have chosen to focus your travel passions on guidebook writing and research. What is it that you love about contributing to the books?
Well, we didn't talk about who would answer first, but
Go ahead, Robyn.
I think what I love the most about the books is when you're updating it for the new edition, you literally see everything that's covered in the book. So you get this very complete, holistic view of all of the places that we go, not just the two or three that most people have in their limited vacation. Whenever I'm done with a new place, I come away with favorites and things that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, that was a good one. I agree totally. We talk about when we do research, we live the book. So we do everything that's in the book. We go to every museum, every restaurant, every hotel, every tourist office, laundromat. So by the end of a very busy few days in the city, we know everything that there is to know that year about that place. I would say also compared to tour guiding, we've also all been tour guides, and I love tour guiding. And I love about tour guiding that you can have a huge impact on the trips of 26 or 28 people. But there's something really satisfying when you're working on a guidebook, knowing that the hard work you put in that day can help thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people in future editions. So I think there's also kind of a bang for your buck element to it that I appreciate.
Well, and as a tour guide, you help tour guides as well, so thank you. I'm going to turn this show over to you guys. So thank you for being with us and sharing your knowledge with our viewers.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. And Robyn, before we start, you and I, at the Rick Steves home office in Edmonds, Robyn and I have our desks about, 10 feet from each other. And so we can barely walk past each other without comparing notes about our latest trip. So before we start off, let's just kind of remind people where we've been just in the last year. So Robyn, remind me, where were you in the past year in Europe?
Yeah, well, I started the year in February in Brussels and Madrid. And then I did 3 books this year. So I did Rome and Croatia for you in May, had a little break, went back for Berlin in July, and then I rounded out in the fall. I did the Eastern France tour, spent a little time in Paris, and then I went back in December to enjoy the wintry wonderlands of London and Madrid.
Oof, I've always wanted to go to London in the winter. I'm jealous. So for me, last year, I started in the spring in Amsterdam and also Venice and Veneto in Italy. And then in the summer, I went back and I call it Germany's heartland. I was in the Rhine, the Mosel, the Black Forest, a little bit of Switzerland, a little bit of Croatia. I was in Zagreb, the capital. And then I really loved a couple of weeks in Slovenia, my favorite country last summer. And then in the fall, I went back and did this Balkan road trip that was mentioned. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And then I ended in Greece, where I did a couple of weeks of island hopping. So yeah, between Robyn and I think we find that as we compare notes each year, we end up covering an awful lot of Europe. And so we've had a great time preparing this talk and brainstorming with each other. And we're going to split up topics. So we're going to kind of take turns as we go. And we're going to get right to it. Now, the first topic, this is sort of trends and challenges in Europe. And Robyn, I think you'll agree, if there's a overarching trend for all of European travel, not just this year, but also last year, I think it's over tourism, crowds, right? That's something that's on a lot of people's minds. And so we're going to take turns and sort of fill you in both on kind of the big picture and the philosophy of the crowds that are kind of inundating Europe, and also some practical tips for how to handle them. And I'm going to lead off here by talking a little bit about this age of over tourism. And what's kind of interesting is I remember in 2019, late 2019, we'd identified over tourism as a big trend. And so we were saying, wow, 2020 is going to be crowded. And of course, ironically, it was anything but crowded in Europe. It was empty. So everyone kind of got a break from it. Some communities decided they liked it empty. And now that the tourists are back, they're kind of having second thoughts. And of course, we've seen travel come back with a vengeance. So if it was down in 2020, 2021, we are well above our record highs already, again, post-COVID. And so it's interesting to kind of kind of reckon with this as a travel company. You might have seen this article or an article like it. This was in the New York Times just last summer, really talking about maybe we've reached a breaking point with tourism. And I got to tell you, if you're going to Europe, most parts of Europe, most of the year, you have to expect some degree of crowds. So we're going to talk today a little bit about wrestling with that reality and what communities are doing to wrestle with that reality. I think an interesting case study is Barcelona, a beautiful, famous city. Gotten really busy. It's kind of been in the headlines a lot lately as one of these over-touristed destinations. In fact, you might have seen this very attention-grabbing story last summertime that there were tourists being shot with water pistols in Barcelona. And I think this was a little bit exaggerated in the way it was reported. It was a real thing. Basically, there was an isolated anti-tourism protest, and a few tourists got spritzed with a water pistol as sort of part of that protest. Robyn and I and the rest of us at Europe Through the Back Door, Rick Steves Europe, we kind of struggle with the way that the mainstream media tackles these issues because they kind of go for the sensational hook, right? And this thing about you might get shot with a water gun if you go to Europe because people hate tourists. That's a really sensational hook, but in our experience, it's a very simplistic view of what's going on in Barcelona. And it's a couple of things to kind of caveat for this. Number one, I think something like 15 million people went to Barcelona as tourists last year, and maybe a couple dozen got shot with water guns. So if you're wondering, am I going to get shot with a water gun if I go to Europe as a tourist? I think the answer is pretty safe to say statistically, probably not. The other interesting thing about these kinds of stories is they make it sound like everyone in Barcelona hates tourists, period. It's complicated. Something like, I think 12% of the local economy in Barcelona is driven by tourism. And in these communities, people really like and respect and appreciate tourists. And in fact, our experience as people who travel with Rick Steves, updating our guidebooks, leading our tours, we encounter so many local people who love connecting with travelers. It's part of their joy. So I want to unpack, first of all, this sort of ethical question almost about, is it appropriate to travel in a time when things are over touristed? And what is it exactly that locals don't like about tourism? I always like to kind of turn things around, think about it from the perspective of the locals. And I think a great case study for this is the Cinque Terre. As probably a lot of you know, this is one of our favorite Italian destinations. It's a beautiful string of 5 traffic-free Riviera villages along the Italian Riviera. It's a beautiful place that was, by and large, put on the map by Rick Steves many years ago. And it's also a place that you might be hearing about a lot as being really a victim of this over-tourism. And a lot of people are asking questions about, is it really appropriate to go to a place like the Cinque Terre? It is complicated. Yeah, Rick Steves attracted a lot of folks there. But if you talk to locals, and we get, Robyn and I, through our work, we get to talk to local people, what you come to understand is there are concerns about this, but they don't necessarily blame independent Rick Steves travelers. One thing they really struggle with, for example, are crowds from cruise ships, which dock nearby, and then they clog train platforms like this when they come to connect the 5 towns. The trails between the towns get very busy, especially when those cruises are in town. And so it's kind of an interesting question. What is it that locals do and don't like about travelers, about tourists, and what's our job as ethical travelers to sort of try to fit into that? I will say the last time I updated this book, this section in our book on Cinque Terre, I put that question very directly to local people. I said, hey, do you want us to stop sending tourists here? Do you want us to stop telling people about this place? And I think every person I talked to said, no, we love travel. Travel helped save these little humble villages that would be basically a poor little backwater and really put us on the map and really saved our economy. And in fact, there's a beautiful wine growing. You can see the vineyards on the back hill there. That wine growing industry probably would have died and gone away if it weren't for the tourists coming through who are actually keeping some of this stuff alive. They said, actually specifically, Robyn, I think you probably heard this. Specifically, we don't want to lose Rick Steves travelers. We do not have any problem with your travelers. We love your travelers. And what you start to realize when you talk to these over-touristed communities is they really distinguish between the right kind of tourism and the wrong kind of tourism. Or if you want to put it really simplistically, good travelers and bad travelers. I'm thinking kind of in terms of a local. When you talk to local people, this really comes clear. So Robyn, I'm kind of curious, I'm guessing you've had this experience too. What are some of the qualities of good tourists or the right kind of travel that these communities are looking for?
Yeah, Cameron, I get that when I'm talking to hoteliers and how excited they are to be in the books, and they say, oh, we just love it when we get someone from the book to reach out to us because we know they're going to be great travelers. I think really what makes a good traveler is just being curious and actually wanting to experience the local culture. And that really means, trying sardines or anchovies when, we grew up with anchovies being on pizzas and out of cans, but in Liguria, these are the things that are delicacies. We've talked about, being respectful, not being loud, spending money to bolster the economy, and not expecting your hotel room to be a standard American hotel room with coffee makers and strong air conditioning, but to really experience life through their eyes.
Absolutely. That's the right kind of traveler, are curious, respectful, interested in understanding and fitting into local culture, not loud, not rowdy. And yes, they want people who are going to spend money. They want people who are going to spend the night, actually invest in the community. And I got to say, we spend a lot of our energy both in our tours and in our guidebooks. We're a people-to-people company. If you could boil down what Rick Steves Europe does in one phrase, it's we connect people to people, Europeans to American travelers, and we love playing matchmaker. And are these Europeans in places like the Cinque Terre, where if you read the headlines, you'll think, well, they must just hate Americans there. No. They hate some of the travelers who come through, but they love some of the travelers who come through. And our tours, for example, this is one of our veteran tour guides, Lisa Anderson. We really work hard to find those people who, even though they're frustrated with all the other tourists, they are thrilled when our groups walk in the door, so we can share that experience. And again, I think let's be realistic. We are part of the economy, and if we are there, they want us to spend money, spend the night, go to a nice dinner. They're not in it for fun. They're in it because they make money doing it that way. And so I think of it as a consumer in that way. I'm investing in them, and that makes them happier to have me there. Now, I hate to tell you this if you're a cruise aficionado, but there is one form of sort of bad traveler in terms of what local people think. This is the wrong kind of tourism. And you're going to hear this sentiment anywhere you go that gets a lot of cruises. A lot of people in the communities that have a lot of cruise ships really have a bad attitude about it. And in fact, we have some of our Greek friends are just visiting us this week from Athens. We're kind of getting some stuff planned for our tours in Greece next year. And I was talking to one of them yesterday, and he put it perfectly. I said, well, what's the problem with cruise travelers, for example, in Athens? And he said, well, from our point of view, the cruise people are the ones who take the most and the ones who give the least. And I thought, wow, that really sums it up. They clog our roads, they clog our infrastructure, they clog our sites, and they don't even buy a bottle of water. That was exactly what he said. And I thought, wow, I can see from that perspective why people would feel that way. Now, if you are an avid cruiser, I don't think cruising is necessarily a bad way to travel. In fact, I've been on a lot of cruises. I was instrumental in writing a Rick Steves guidebook about cruise ports. We believe that there are good travelers on cruise ships, and you can be a good traveler on a cruise ship. But how can I put this? I think if you're a good traveler on a cruise ship, on some of those ships, you might be in the minority. And I think it's especially important to be conscientious about trying to be a good traveler while you're on a cruise, and just be realistic that a lot of folks in a lot of these communities really aren't happy with cruises. I was in Stavanger, Norway, for example. I thought this picture really captured it. A couple of old cannons pointing at a cruise ship that's sort of dominating the old town. So not to be a downer about cruises, but that's just one of the trends. We're talking about trends tonight. And if you go to these communities, you're going to hear a lot of frustration about cruises. I want to talk about 3 communities in particular, and then I'm going to hand it off to Robyn. But first, I want to talk about 3 communities in particular that I've been to in the last year that are kind of the poster children for over-tourism, and mainly to talk about something interesting is happening. A lot of these communities are taking action to mitigate the impacts of over-tourism, and they're doing it in different ways. And as a traveler, if you're going to one of these places, you might run into some of this. So here are 3 examples of different ways that communities are trying to sort of combat over-tourism. Santorini is the first one, this gorgeous, gorgeous Greek island that's literally situated on the lip of a volcano caldera. As I've kind of set up as a theme, a lot of these places are really trying to combat cruises specifically. The cruise passengers who arrive for a few hours every day are the ones who are creating, in the local perspective, some of the problems. So if you go to Santorini at certain times, the streets are totally clogged with tourists. You can go to the beautiful little village of Ia at the northern tip of the island. At certain times of day, it's totally idyllic. At other times of day, it's a human traffic jam. You cannot walk down the main street. This just happened to me a few months ago. And so one thing that's happening in some of these Greek islands, Santorini, Mykonos, they're limiting cruise passengers. That's just the rule. I talked to our Greek friends yesterday, and I mentioned this, and they said, oh, yeah, they're going from 7 a day to 5 a day. Like, that's going to make a big difference. There's a little cynicism about how that might actually make an impact. But a lot of these communities are targeting cruise passengers, so just be aware of that. cruise arrivals, let's say. They're trying to control how many cruises come. Another place that's doing that right now is Venice, by the way. I was also in Venice last spring, and this is a picture I took many years ago. This is a big change recently. You will not see any cruise ships anymore near the old historical center of Venice. In fact, Venice has banned all cruise ships except small cruise ships from the entire lagoon of Venice. And even the small cruise ships now have to dock at the far end of the lagoon. You can't even see it from the historic center. It used to be you'd be standing on St. Mark's Square and you might see a giant cruise ship sort of sail past. That doesn't happen anymore. And in fact, larger cruise ships, which is what most people are arriving on, can't dock anywhere in or near Venice at all. If you're going to Venice on a cruise this year, check your itinerary. You're probably either actually docking in Trieste, which is off this way, or Ravenna, which is this way. Each one is a 2.5, 3-hour bus ride to get into Venice. So that's a big change that's happening in a lot of communities, this sort of limitation on cruises. And Venice has been in the news a lot lately because they have something else they're doing, which is called the Venice Access Fee. I'm not going to get into all of the nuts and bolts on this, but essentially they've designated a few key dates throughout the year, mainly weekends in the summer, where if you're visiting Venice, you have to go online before you arrive and register online. And if you're not staying overnight, if you're just a day tripper, you have to pay a fee of 5 to 10 euros for the day, depending on how far ahead you book. That's sort of the broad strokes. There's a whole website set up. Unfortunately, hey, this is Italy, so the website's not actually able to take registrations yet. That's just the information so far. But you can go to the website and you can see on that calendar there, the red dates are the dates that you are impacted. If you're going to Venice on those days, you will have to register. And by the way, we're trying to track all of this stuff. It's changing all the time. And we've created this new blog that we just started a few weeks ago. It's called the Travel Updates and Insights blog at ricksteves.com. It'll be on an email that we'll send you later with links. And there's a whole article on our Travel Updates and Insights blog, fresh out of the rucksack. We just wrote it a couple of weeks ago, explaining all the details on the Venice Access Fee. So if you're going to Venice this summer, you might want to look at that and make sure you understand it. And even if you're not, it's just good to know that this is maybe a way of the future. They did it last year. I was in Venice last year just before it went into effect. And a lot of, scuttlebutt locally, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? Everyone said, well, it's an experiment. They probably won't do it again next year. Well, guess what? They've announced they are doing it again this year. So this is maybe a fact of life if you're traveling to crowded places. And the third city I wanted to talk about that's an interesting case study is Amsterdam. Beautiful city. Again, I was there last spring, had a great time. Amsterdam is also very crowded. It's a little bit different because it's less of a cruise destination. It has some particular features that they're struggling with in terms of over-tourism. One of them is, of course, that very popular red light district. Of course, Amsterdam famously has very permissive laws about the sex trade and about marijuana. And so it's often attracted kind of rowdy people who like to come to the red light district and party. And the city is really cracking down. They're saying, we actually don't want that. There are people who live in the red light district. This is actually one of the most historic districts in all of Amsterdam, happens to be the red light district. And so they're starting to really crack down. For example, they get tired of people who come in from out of the country on sort of a stag party. And then they kind of stumble out of the pub and pee into the canals. This is not okay. And they're starting to really levy fines for that sort of thing. And in fact, the city of Amsterdam is actually actively telling specifically young British men, we do not want you. I want to repeat this. The city of Amsterdam is investing in a campaign targeted at young British stag parties, basically saying, do not come to Amsterdam for your stag party. So this gives you a sense of sort of how a lot of these communities have sort of hit their limit. They're also talking about relocating the red light district out into the suburbs because they're concerned about the people who are trying to live there. And the last thing I want to talk about that I saw as a trend in Amsterdam that I think is going to be a trend everywhere pretty quickly. There's really a scarcity of accommodations in Amsterdam as it's become so popular. And as it's a very constrained historic city, there's only so many places to build hotels. So while I was there last April, so happened while I was there, they announced they're going to cap all new hotel construction in the entire city. So in other words, if there's not a hotel now, there's not going to be a hotel in the future. And this might sound like a good thing, like, oh, good, well, they're going to, control the number of tourists. But the interesting thing about this is, and I talked to locals about this, it's kind of a double-edged sword. The problem with this is there can't be new hotels. And so now all of the old, cheap, kind of threadbare hotels that used to be the cheap alternatives, the only option is to renovate those to make them 5-star hotels. So basically, the price for hotels in Amsterdam is skyrocketing. I was shocked. I was updating our guidebook. I went to all of our hotels. it was hard to find a decent mid-range double room for less than about 350, 400 euros, anywhere in the historic center of Amsterdam I'm talking about. And so this is an interesting dilemma. They want to be hotel neutral, right? No new hotels. We're going to stick with what we've got. But local people aren't so sure, well, what's this going to do to our local economy as well? It's going to make Amsterdam a super exclusive, expensive destination. And then there's another component to this that's also happening in a lot of other European communities. Airbnb is really being targeted as something that's being heavily restricted or even outlawed, because there's a lot of people who make the case that when you have Airbnb, it makes it a lot harder for young people to buy a starter home in that community. It's much more lucrative to turn every property into a short-term rental, and it's kind of destroying the local housing market. And so Amsterdam is a great example where they've really started to strictly regulate Airbnbs, and with lots of very strict rules. So you can still find them on Amsterdam, but they're very particular kinds. Again, I love kind of unpacking these when I'm in the field. I went to a traditional B&B that we have in our guidebook that we recommend. We love this place. Wonderful local family that just rents out some rooms in their home. It's a very local experience. And the woman who runs it was chatting with me. She said, this is really hard because all of these restrictions for Airbnb also apply to traditional B&Bs. So for example, you can only have 2 units. There can only be 2 beds per unit. And you have to be living there. It can only be in a person's home. And so she said, we used to have more freedom to run our B&B. For example, we have a family room and we can't rent it out as a family room anymore because you can only have 2 people. And my husband and I used to occasionally go away for the weekend and we'd hire somebody to come in and watch the place for us. But no, legally now we have to be on the premises if we have guests. And she was the person who said to me, you know, the impact of all of these reforms is we're limiting the number of hotels, but we're also increasing all of the prices of hotels. And she said, we're finding it's much more expensive for us as locals living in the historic district to go and get dinner because all of the restaurants are now priced to cater to people staying in very expensive hotels. And so the whole economy is going up. This is a complicated issue, and I think there's some ethics kind of mixed in here, and it's the kind of stuff that I think a thoughtful traveler enjoys kind of wrestling with. By the way, one theme that Robyn and I'm about to hand it off to her, but one theme that we aren't getting into too deeply, that's another big trend in Europe, is a big trend around the world, which is things are expensive. Speaking of hotels in Amsterdam getting expensive. I got to tell you, if we think we've had rough inflation here in the United States, Europeans will be the first to tell you, actually, we're jealous of what's going on in the United States. We have much worse inflation over on our side of the Atlantic. So for locals and travelers alike, there's a lot of sticker shock. And when we update our guidebooks, we're often shocked at the prices going up. And in fact, I'll just kind of get on my soapbox for a moment and remind you all, if you've been paying attention to all of this, Europeans will tell you America has actually fared better than almost anywhere in the world. I mean, we complain about our economy because things are tough for a lot of people. But in fact, we're doing a lot better than other parts of the world on most measures in terms of recovering from the COVID economy. And so what you do hear about a lot from Europeans these days, even more than here in the US, is just how expensive things have become. So throughout our talk, we're going to be talking about a variety of budget travel tips. And so that's just one other kind of facet to all of this. Robyn, you're going to tell us a little bit more about your take on over-tourism and the crowds.
Yeah, definitely. And just as you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind is something that someone else in the industry once said to me. He said, you know, the thing you have to remember is that these sites and these cities, they weren't built for travelers to come. They were actually built for locals. And so it really is this case of a city has something amazing to see, like Prague, where they gather for the astrological clock that's so old and amazing, but that clock wasn't really built for travelers. That clock was built for something practical for the people who lived there. And when you frame it that way, I don't know, you have a little more compassion, I think, for the locals. And you just want to become a better traveler, like we were talking about. But yeah, so the reality of traveling among crowds is, and Cameron, it's funny that you and I both picked a similar picture because we typed in crowds and what came up was this shot in Prague when the clock was about to do its display. So yeah, Europe is crowded. But there are 2 types of crowds, really. And the way I like to think of it is the one type of crowd that feels claustrophobic and like you're a can of sardines. And you have to be mentally prepared to squish onto public transportation and to shimmy your shoulders on the sidewalk. And we talked about this, not everyone hates crowds. Some people don't mind at all, and they go to all the festivals that have thousands of people. Other people look at this photo and get anxiety over it. So understanding your threshold for crowds and crowded places is a tip when you're planning your vacation. The other type of crowds is the crowds that create long lines, and this comes into play at sites, and we're going to talk about reservations in a minute. But so the key to these types of crowds, where you're out in the open, you're not necessarily squished or crammed into one claustrophobic place, is these just take a little more time, a little more patience. So leave early, leave yourself some time. That's like the key to staying sane and to staying kind of at peace. And then I like to think about, if you're going to be in a line, utilize that time to read up about that site, or to look at where you might want to go to dinner, or what snack or what gelato place you want to hit up after this. And another practical tip, especially in Europe, is if you're going to be standing in a long line, think about how to keep yourself cool. So whether that's having an umbrella, wearing a hat, carrying a water bottle, we're going to talk more about ways to beat the heat in a moment. We really focus on 3 different kinds of reservations. The ones that are required, like here at the castle in Edinburgh, or at the Vatican Museum or the Alhambra. There's a handful of sites across Europe where you absolutely have to have an advance reservation for a specific day, for a specific time, or else in all likelihood, you're not going to get in. And then the next category is some places that are just recommended, good to have. It'll save you time. It allows you to prioritize your day and kind of focus on the 1 or 2 things you really want to make sure you accomplish. But if you don't get an advance reservation, you might still have a chance to get in. So it's not impossible to get in if you don't make a reservation for these. And then the last category is just a reservation that's possible. And Cameron, you've probably seen this also in all of your guidebook research, where all the sites now are so proud to say, yeah, you can pre-book a reservation online. It's not any more money. And actually, in some cases, it's cheaper to buy in advance online. But the thing is, it locks you into a certain time and of a certain day. And you never know, if you want to have spontaneous time to enjoy something else in that city, you're going to feel under pressure and anxiety to go to this place where you probably could have turned up at any time of day and gotten in just fine. So again, in our guidebooks, we do a really good job of telling you exactly which ones are required, which ones we recommend, and which ones don't even worry about. The next thing you need to do to combat crowds is know when to go. So for example, in Dubrovnik, if you want to walk the walls, which is like the #1 thing to do in Dubrovnik, just know, in order to avoid the crowds, if you wait until the late afternoon when all of the cruise ship people are out of the city, you're going to have the walls almost practically to yourself. And if you go just at the right time, you're going to have a beautiful sunset as well. Another place that's a good case study, as Cameron was giving his case studies earlier, the Acropolis in Athens. If you know how many cruise ships are docked or in the port and are visiting the Acropolis, the #1 thing to do, you're going to have an experience that's miserable if you wait until a little bit later in the day or an hour before they close. And again, there's nothing better than having the Acropolis almost all to yourself, rather than being in this crowd of hundreds and thousands of people. And these are tips we give in the book, of course.
Robyn, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
You just reminded me of one of my favorite travel tips that I discovered this year. It's a travel hack, if you will. Every cruise port has a website where you can see exactly which ships are in town and what time and how many people are on them. And if you're in a place that has a lot of cruises, you can look ahead and know Tuesday is going to be a nightmare. Wednesday, there are no cruises in town. And it can help you, like Robyn is saying, it can really help you determine when to do different things.
Yeah.
That's the easiest thing in the world. All you do is Google cruise ship arrivals Santorini, and you'll get a literally hour-by-hour schedule of who's going to be in town.
That's great, Cameron. And local guides as well. If you're hiring a local guide and you might say, hey, can we go this day, this morning? They're going to tell you, nope, we're going to wait until the afternoon, or can you do it the next day? So yeah, definitely lean on the locals, lean on that tip is great, Cameron. Another great tip for beating crowds is Europe is alive at night. So you could consider, instead of sightseeing during the bulk of the day, wait a little bit longer and do some of your sightseeing at night. And the bonus with that is not only these floodlit fountains and the buildings that are lit up at night that just have a different ambiance, but also all of the music and the street performers that come out at night. It really provides like an extra layer of something interesting. One thing I'm really fascinated by, and I experienced this last year when I was researching in Andalusia, is the concept of the siesta. And that's the afternoon pause. It happens in a lot of different countries. One country it happens in all the time is Spain. And if you're out between the hours of, say, 2 and almost 6 or 7 p.m., you go to a great square and it's practically empty. That's because everyone's taking a break. But you go back out later that night and all of a sudden you have everyone and their brother out having a drink before dinner, enjoying, just visiting with one another. So it's nothing wrong with going out during the siesta, but it's going to be a lot more lively if you wait and do it on the same time zone or on the same timing as that local community. And then, of course, we do need to talk about Jubilee in Rome this year. So all of 2025 is considered a Jubilee year. We have lots of information on our website and on Instagram and in our blogs about what that means. Essentially, it's going to bring just so many travelers to celebrate the Catholic Jubilee year in Vatican City and across the city of Rome. Now, if that sounds like a nightmare to you, then by all means, reschedule your trip to Rome for 2026. But if you're interested, there has been a lot of renovations, a lot of renewals and getting ready for this that could be like a great time to go to Rome. And we've been talking about this. We saw this last year with the Olympics. Everyone avoided Paris before the Olympics, and it had kind of a big dip, and it saw only the people during the Olympics were going to Paris. And then in 2025, we're seeing a big resurgence of people who are going to be going to Paris. So it actually might be the year to go to Rome. And just know that a lot of what's happening with the Jubilee year mainly predominantly will be in the Vatican City, not necessarily in all the other sites in Rome. That said, the next thing you need to know about or think about is where to go when you're in one of these crowded cities. This is an example of a line that I saw outside of the Colosseum when I was updating the guidebook, and I thought, my goodness, who would ever consider waiting in this line in this crowd to see the Colosseum? Well, of course, people who have never been and have always heard about the Colosseum and want to see it, it might be worth it to you to be among these people in these crowds. But if what you're really interested in is seeing ancient Rome, know that a 10-minute walk away from the Colosseum, the Baths of Caracalla are there, and you can get up close and personal with these historic ancient ruins with, I don't know, 1% of the crowd, 5% of the crowd, and better access. You get closer up to it. You're still seeing the marvels of ancient Rome and engineering. And then a personal favorite that I found, I got a tip off from our map maker, Dave. He said, "Oh, you're going to Rome. Have you heard about this new museum? It's about a map, a 3rd century map of Rome that was actually uncovered in the Forum in the 16th century. And what it shows is the amazing how accurate they got the city of Rome in the 3rd century compared to the 16th century compared to today. And you can actually walk along on top of these marble slabs of the old 3rd century map of Rome, overlaid with the 16th century map of Rome, overlaid with the current map of Rome. So if you're really interested in what the history of ancient Rome is, this is a great alternative to just seeing the Colosseum.
Robyn, that's fascinating. And I think you're hitting on something that we're starting to push a little bit more, which is the idea is that everyone has the marquee big name sites they want to go to. In Rome, they want to go to the Colosseum. The other big one is the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican Museums in Rome. And it's kind of funny because increasingly some of the best advice is just don't go to those places. Go to some of these other wonderful alternative sites that give you a similar experience that are less crowded. I do know, I want to address this. It's easy. People, I did a blog post a few years ago that was titled "Skip the Sistine Chapel," trying to make this case. And I got a pretty angry, small percentage, a pretty angry response of people saying, well, it's easy for you to say. You've probably been to the Sistine Chapel 10 times. And it's true. You and I have been, to be fair. We probably have been to some of these places several times. So I guess, how would you rationalize that to somebody? If somebody's debating, do I want to go to this big site and suffer through the lines, or should I skip it? What do you think about that?
I think I think that's a very individual choice, right? What's important to you? What has always inspired you? Like, what is the inspiration behind what you want to see and why you want to see it? You can put up with just about anything if you have that mindset of I've wanted to do this my whole life. I will say that we also had visited the Neuschwanstein Palace in Germany on our tours, and we would get the feedback of travelers before and after visiting, and they say, oh yeah, I was so looking forward to it, I've always seen it, I've always wanted to see it, and afterwards they just are so let down by it. But that's the kind of thing, like, you personally, all of us, each of us, we won't know until we do it.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, right?
Yeah.
Because I think there are people who go to this, insist on going to the Sistine Chapel, and the second they leave, they just say, I can't believe I subjected myself to that. Never again. And I wish if I could go back, I wouldn't have done it. There are other people who would say it's absolutely worth suffering through the crowds because that's once in a lifetime to see that. And everyone has to make their own decision. So I guess I want to say I realize it's pretty rich for us to tell as people who've done all of this to say, well, you can skip that. I think the point, though, is we want to give you permission. I think Robyn's saying it just right. Give you permission to don't feel a sense of obligation that just because something is famous, you have to go. Know your own threshold for dealing with crowds. And if you have a pretty low threshold for crowds, think twice. And this Bassif College you mentioned is a great example. You've got the Colosseum, which is a mob scene, and 15 minutes walk up the road. If you love giant Roman engineering, you have the place to yourself if you go to the Baths of Caracalla. So
I mean,
it's an
it's
interesting.
the size, the scale of it is almost more impressive than the Colosseum. And to think that, like, yeah, it's incredible. And I think what we're trying to do here is set the expectation so that, if you've always wanted to see it, if you're, I love the Colosseum, all right, and I love in Olympia in Greece the ancient stadium because I'm such a sports fan, and I know you are too. So there is this sense of like being in the first arena and how special that is. Just set those expectations and understand it's going to be crowded. It might not be the ideal circumstances, but this is something I want to do.
Well said. And I guess I would say my attitude tonight is a little bit of tough love. And
Yeah.
I got to say, Robyn, you've heard this rant, and I was debating whether I should say this. But I got to tell you, if somebody goes to the most crowded place in the most crowded time of year at the most crowded time of day and then complains about the crowds, I'm running out of patience for that person's complaints, to be honest with you. Like, I get it. Like, it's if you're going to St. Mark's Square in Venice at 11 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be a 2 hour line to get inside the basilica, and you're
Yeah.
going to be miserable. But you kind of brought that on yourself. So I think what Robyn and I are kind of saying is this is a gut check, a reality check, and an encouragement to really think about what your appetite is for that and to prepare. If you go to that same location a few hours later, there might not be a line at all. And I'm going to propose something else. Robyn's just been talking about different sites within a city. I also think increasingly as a company, we're talking more and more about, well, what about alternatives to the destinations? Go to a whole different city. Again, I know you've dreamed about going to Venice your whole life, and man, the Cinque Terre is fantastic. But if you know that you don't like crowds, Italy has a basically limitless number of beautiful other towns and cities that have a drastically smaller number of tourists. And recently, I've gotten more off the beaten path the last few years. And for example, I just picked this one out of a hat. This could be any one of 10 towns I've been to in the last few years. Modena in Emilia-Romagna. Beautiful, beautiful Italian town. Tiny fraction of the tourists of a place like Venice, or a place like Florence, or a place like Siena, for example. Lucca in Tuscany. Tuscany is completely overrun with tourists. I've been to Lucca several times. It's not exactly undiscovered. There is some tourism there. But boy, it's also, by the way, a very short train ride from the Cinque Terre. If you're coming on a cruise ship to the port for the Cinque Terre, in our cruise port guidebook, we actually don't cover the Cinque Terre. We say don't go to the Cinque Terre because it can't handle you. The trains and the trails can't handle you. Instead, get on the train and go in the other direction, unlike 95% of your other cruise passengers, and go to Lucca, which is an absolutely delightful town that gets missed by a lot of people. Lucca, by the way, is a 25-minute bus ride from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Here's a great example. You could go to Pisa to see the Leaning Tower, or you could literally go 20, 25 minutes away to Lucca and have this beautiful, historic, beautiful town with gorgeous old historic churches all to yourself. I'm going to run through a couple other alternatives just to challenge your assumptions. I mentioned earlier about Amsterdam, how expensive the accommodations are in Amsterdam. Bewilderingly expensive. 400 euros in peak season for what would probably cost 150 euros in most other European countries, a mid-range hotel room. This is not a luxurious hotel room. You can get on the train at Amsterdam Central Station. In 20 minutes, you can be in the town of Haarlem. In 30 minutes, you can be in the town of Leiden. And in about 45 minutes, you can be in the town of Delft. These are three absolutely wonderful small Dutch towns, all right on the high-speed train line with constant trains back and forth to Amsterdam, where you can pay about half as much for a comparable quality of accommodation. You can still go into Amsterdam and enjoy being there, and you can retreat each evening to your own little quiet retreat in a much less touristy town. Again, none of these towns are undiscovered, but they're far less crowded than Amsterdam. The Greek islands, I mentioned earlier to Robyn, I was in the Greek islands this last October and September. The reason I was there is we are expanding our Greece guidebook. For this exact reason, we realized that we were covering a lot of really touristy islands. We cover Mykonos, which you see here. We cover Santorini. And we said, you know, we need to provide alternatives. So for the next edition of our Greece book, it's not out yet, but it'll be out later next year, I went and scouted and wrote up several new islands, new to us islands in Greece. Just a 30-minute express boat ride from Mykonos, you can be in Naxos, which is a beautiful, beautiful island with a great food scene and agricultural heritage, a wonderful history all its own, and a very similar kind of beautiful, whitewashed, relaxed Greek vacation ambiance. We're also adding to our next edition the island of Paros and the island of Folegandros, which is this absolutely delightful little backdoor Greek island, tiny little island getaway, 45 minutes from Santorini, and you can have this gorgeous little Greek village all to yourself, essentially. I'm not going to say these places are completely uncrowded. It's still busy. They're still tourist destinations. The boats are still kind of a mess when you're going between islands in Greece. But when you compare them to some of the big famous places, you should just be aware these are just three. There are dozens of alternatives to the big famous places. You don't have to go to the big famous places. So just keep that in mind as you travel. Also, consider going to completely different parts of Europe. There are whole swaths of Europe that almost never see American tourists. And this fall, as I mentioned earlier, I did a wonderful 2.5-week road trip through the Balkans, connecting places that don't get very many American tourists. There is some tourism from the Balkans and from Eastern and Central Europe, but almost no Americans. Places like Albania, places like Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo. I had a fantastic few days in Kosovo. It's a beautiful country, gorgeous landscape, very welcoming local people, wonderful history. North Macedonia, just to kind of plant the seed that if you want to get away from the crowds, if you don't want to be the person who goes to the most crowded parts of Europe and then complains about the crowds, if you want an alternative, consider going to other parts of Europe. And by the way, if you're interested in the Balkans, Lisa mentioned earlier, we do every Monday night travel sessions just like this one. And coming up on February 17th, I'll be doing a whole segment like this just about that Balkan trip if you'd like some more inspiration in that regard. I also wanted to point out we're on night 3 of our 2-week travel festival, and we were very intentional in how we planned these classes on this exact theme. The reason that we planned the classes we did is for this exact conversation we just had. There are wonderful alternatives that often get missed when you're planning a trip. This is why tomorrow's class is about Europe's top 10 second cities. Instead of going to the big crowded main city, go to the lesser known second city. Next Monday, I'm doing a special about the inauguration. But then on Tuesday and Wednesday are also on this topic. On Tuesday, Lisa, who you met at the top of the show, is doing a class on Village Europe. And on Wednesday, our very own Robyn is doing a class called Italy This or That, which is helping you kind of figure out your options in Italy. And then Rick's going to wrap the whole thing up on Thursday. But it's not a coincidence that many of our classes this year for the Travel Festival are to inspire you to consider other destinations than the ones that you might default to if you just kind of went with what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, and we were talking, just the two of us, Cameron, we were so excited to give this class. We have way too much content to fit into a 90 or an hour to 90 minutes. But, you know, our background, our history at Rick Steves Europe the Back Door is in the name of our company. It's finding those back doors. And we talked about how the book, Europe Through the Back Door, the first half is practical travel skills. The second half is finding those back doors. And I participate in a lot of industry kind of webinars, seminars, and whatnot. And everyone else is finally catching up to like, oh, maybe we should find some of these smaller places. They don't call them back doors, but maybe we should go to these places that are undiscovered. And it's like, yeah, we've been doing that for, that's our bread and butter. So, but that is definitely something gets thrown around a lot. And we're leading the charge, I think.
Well said.
Yeah, so moving on from crowds, we are going to talk about some more challenges in Europe, and definitely extreme weather is a challenge. Europe is hot. These temperatures are in Celsius, I'd like to remind you. So 28 degrees Celsius is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't even see well, you see 128 on here. I just say that because that's a good indicator for me. If it's above 28, it's above 82. So as you can see, Europe is hot. This is a challenge, and there's a lot of reasons why this is a challenge. One of those reasons is air conditioning. I know we are used to very strong air conditioning that can be turned on and frankly left on all day long. So when we come back, it's nice and cool room. Well, in Europe, you might not get that strong of air conditioning. You also might not get air conditioning at all. A lot of places in Europe only turn it on after Easter, for example. You also have the challenge of old registered historic buildings that aren't allowed to add air conditioning, so they have to get creative and add fans or open the windows to try to keep you cool. Another problem is countries that historically have not needed air conditioning, like Switzerland, are now finding that, ooh, it's getting warmer in the summers, and it would be a lot nicer if we could provide some high-tech fans, because we're in Switzerland, so we've got like the Swiss Army knife of fans here to keep our travelers cool. And Cameron, on the other side of extreme weather, I know you've experienced personally flooding.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of thinking through examples, and the extreme heat that's being caused by climate change is really changing the face of European travel. But other forms of extreme weather can have a big impact too. So last spring, I mentioned I was in Germany on the Mosel River, and this is the town of Cochem. And I was here just a few days after this river flooded. There was lots of flooding in Germany last year. And you can see the riverboats. They're just started running the day before I got there. And I was staying in another village actually just up the river. And they told me at the breakfast table, they said, well, if you were sitting here 1 week ago, you would be underwater. And so I guess the point I would make here is extreme weather, unfortunately, is a bigger and bigger part of the reality of traveling anywhere. And the tip is basically be prepared for the fact that things can change in a hurry, and you're going to have to be flexible if you're traveling. We're seeing it right now in Los Angeles with these terrible wildfires caused by howling winds and drought. I was telling Robyn last spring, my wife, or 2 springs ago, I guess, my wife and I were going to New Zealand, and we saw in the news that a terrible cyclone was about to hit New Zealand exactly the moment that we were supposed to land in Auckland. And so we really scrambled at the last minute and rebooked to go to Australia for a few days first. And then after a few days to kind of let things settle, we went to New Zealand and resumed the rest of our planned trip, which was really interesting. I think part of it is you don't want to be inconvenienced, but also you don't want to be a burden on places that are already dealing with a natural disaster. We had a long conversation about, well, it's not just about our safety. It's about you don't want to show up when the city's underwater and expect to be accommodated, right? And by the time we made it to our regularly planned trip a few days later, things had kind of gotten back to normal enough that people said, oh, you're some of the first people who've come back after the storm, and we're so glad you're here because we depend on you for our income. So I would just say that it's complicating things quite a bit. And honestly, some people are better at being flexible than others. But in our age of extreme weather that's being caused by our changing climate, we really have to be prepared to change plans. Don't be so rigid and stuck to your plans that you take yourself into a dangerous or an unpleasant situation where you're in the way. Be ready to flex with what's happening.
And speaking of that, great transition for how you can be flexible and beat the heat because it's getting hotter. So the number one thing you can do is take a break during the middle of the day. This is something that I already talked about. Spain does regularly. A lot of businesses will close down for the middle of the day, not only to rest, but also to get out of that heat. Athens, again, another prime example where their government is saying, no, it's not safe for you to be up on the Acropolis between 12 and 2, and it's not safe for our employees either. So we are just going to possibly close down and have an enforced break in the middle of the day. That's something that they did sporadically. I was actually there when they did that. But they might start planning it instead of being instead of reacting. They're thinking about being more proactive and seeing what a benefit it could be to everyone. One of the words you're going to hear in 2025 is coolcation, the concept of going somewhere traditionally cooler weather to enjoy your vacation. Like this is above the Arctic Circle in Rovaniemi, Finland. These Nordic and northern port city towns are really used to having people enjoy their cooler climate, lots of outdoor activities. So definitely trend in 2025 is going to be the concept of the coolcation. Something that we say and we preach here at Rick Steves is typically you want to think about going north or south of the Alps in the spring and then north of the Alps in the fall or in the summer, and that will help you stay cool. But year round, definitely the Nordic countries, Iceland, even Greenland is becoming more popular for this concept of a coolcation. If you are going somewhere a little bit warmer, for example, Budapest, there are definitely ways that you can keep cool. And one of those things is to do as the locals do and jump in that fountain, but also practical things like wearing a sun hat, wearing sunscreen. Europe is full of water fountains where you can cool off. Carrying a reusable water bottle and really staying hydrated is a very important part of beating the heat. Another way to beat the heat is traveling in what's considered off season. And really, we need to come up with a better term because off season, not only is it sometimes better weather, it's also fewer crowds. So this is key. I think it's not just off season, it's just what is the best season for you to travel given where you want to go and what you want to do. Spring, typically, you've got all of the flowers, especially in Amsterdam and Keukenhof in Netherlands. But you also have starting to be longer days and the temperatures are a little bit cooler. So you definitely can enjoy more time outside. And I think a lot of people start to do that when they've come out of the winter break. It's like, oh, there's sunshine. I think it's time to be outside for a picnic. Of course, summer, again, going north of the Alps in the summer, this is actually, summer can be high season in some of these places because it's their best season to be outdoors. They have the most daylight, the land of the midnight sun. Scotland has daylight almost until 11 p.m. So you can really stretch your days, like we talked about, taking a break when it's going to be hot and coming out back at night. The other thing about traveling in the summer is that a lot of the cities will have activities for you to do in the evenings, whether it's music concerts or festivals. And really, just life expands and riverbanks become living rooms. And do as the locals do. They eat late at night, so try to adjust. Again, take that siesta, take that break, come back out around 8 o'clock and have a coffee or have a drink, enjoy the local scenery, and then think about having dinner. And as you move into the fall, again, days are starting to get a little bit shorter. Colors are changing, the temperatures are cooling down, and this can be a really fantastic time to go anywhere in Europe. And I know, Cameron, you were in Tuscany in the fall, and you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I just shared this picture with Robyn. My wife's family. We went to Tuscany for Thanksgiving. Of course, they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Tuscany, but there was a great agriturismo doing a Thanksgiving themed week in Tuscany late November. And you think, oh, it's going to be dreary and drab in late November. No, the winter wheat was coming in. So we had beautiful green hillsides in Tuscany in late November. And it was really quite cool at night, but quite pleasant during the day. And I realized, gosh, this is actually a lot more pleasant than going many other times of the year.
Other cool things to do in the fall, I'm just thinking of, you have the harvest season. So whether it's grapes or olives, that's a fun time to be around. There's a lot of festivities in Greece, in Spain, in Italy, and France, where you've got those things going on. I talked at the beginning of the show, I spent a little bit of time in London this winter because I've always wanted to be there for Christmas. And Cameron, I highly recommend that you go. But winter season is a great time to go to big cities because they're all set up for things you can do indoors, and they've got fantastic things for you to do and see even in the evenings. You can see the Christmas lights, Christmas markets, all kinds of festivities. The thing to remember, though, we talk about this, winter is a great time to go, and there's typically fewer crowds. But when you're surrounded by Christmas markets and festivals and things like that, and especially here in Venice in Carnival season, February is a great time to go to Venice unless you're going during Carnival, because that's going to bring more people. So even if you're traveling in the off season thinking you're going to beat the heat and beat the crowds, be aware of if there are festivals going on and try to avoid those or join in the merriment if you're interested. And Cameron, I know we've been focusing a lot at Rick Steves Europe on environmentally friendly travel, and I think you were instrumental in kind of getting some of the travel tips put together for our readers.
Yeah, I mean, look, we also completely realize as travelers, we have a lot of responsibility for the changing climate. You know, as travelers going to Europe all the time, we have a huge carbon footprint. And so part of what we're doing, in addition to giving you tips for how to beat the heat, is trying to be conscientious as a company about acknowledging our role in that. The article that Robyn just showed you is on our website, and it's some tips we have for being an environmentally conscious travelers. Examples are what Robyn said earlier. Turn off your air conditioning and your lights when you leave your hotel room in Europe. Europeans, you'll notice, are very stingy about electricity, not because they're stingy, but also because they're environmentally conscious. Be aware of the fact that a train has a much less carbon footprint than flying or taking a car. So there's an article there on our website with some thoughts on that. And in terms of a global issue, I think Robyn and I are both extremely proud to work for a travel company that takes this seriously. We have our climate smart commitment. This was the brainchild of Craig Davidson, our COO. And essentially, we said, Rick says, it's basically a self-imposed carbon tax, right? Like we need to reckon with the fact that we, as a company that promotes travel, are creating the problem, contributing to the problem. And so for the last several years, every year, we donate more than $1 million to a group of different charities. And the way they've chosen the charities is really interesting. That's why we call it the Climate Smart Commitment. They're mainly charities that work with people in the developing world, and we kind of want to have our cake and eat it too. So we are trying to address global climate change in a way that also improves the lives of people living in the developing world. So here's an example. This is all very abstract, and you can read the whole portfolio on our website. But here's a really concrete example. In the developing world, a lot of smallholder farmers live in very humble houses where they basically just do all of their cooking and all of their heating with an open fire and no chimney, and the smoke just kind of drifts up through the ceiling, and people are inhaling it all day long, and people have health problems and a very poor quality of life. One of the organizations that we work with, that we contribute to every year, helps install smart stoves in those homes, which are more efficient. They pollute less. They put less carbon into the atmosphere. They use less firewood. That means you have to spend less time gathering the firewood. And the people now live in a home that has clean air, so their health is better, their quality of life is better, in lots of little ways through this beautiful portfolio of organizations that Craig and Rick have curated over several years to the tune of more than $1 million a year. We're trying to make a difference in the fact that we work in an industry that's contributing to climate change. So I think I can speak for Robyn saying we're really proud of that. I think that's a great thing about Rick Steves Europe. The next topic we want to get into is technology. And again, we could do a whole evening about just technology, but I'm just going to pick some of my favorite recent trends and tips to kind of be aware of if you're a traveler. Of course, there's lots of ways that technology can affect your trip. One of the things that, of course, again, this is a little obvious because it's also very common here too now, but something that's been a huge change since COVID especially is contactless payment, just tapping your credit card. A lot of places are going almost cashless. You mentioned London, Robyn. The last time I was in London, I had trouble spending cash. Everything was just tap to pay. Public transportation within cities, very often now you don't have to go to a ticket window. You don't have to go to the driver to buy a ticket. You just tap your credit card when you get on the bus, tap it when you get off, and it's all paid for and automatically deducted from your card, which makes things really easy. And some countries are really far ahead of the curve on this. The Netherlands, when I was there a year ago, I learned they are the first country in the world where the entire national transportation system is all tap to pay. Now this is very common in city transportation, in a city bus or a subway or something. But think about this, in the Netherlands, whether you're taking a metro or a tram within the city, whether you're taking a regional bus an hour into the countryside to a small town, whether you're getting on that train that I mentioned that takes you 45 minutes to Delft, any and all transportation in the entire country of the Netherlands, you just tap in, tap out, and it's paid for. You never have to buy a ticket. You never have to talk to the conductor. It's all taken care of. So this is a great development for convenience. However, I think it's really important to remember any new technology comes with a learning curve. And so when I was doing our Amsterdam guidebook last spring, I had to figure this out. In the Netherlands, and it can be different in other places, you tap when you get in and you tap when you get out. If you forget to tap when you leave the system, it can be a problem because that's how they know how long you've been traveling. And if you don't tap out, they might think you travel longer and charge you more. The wrinkle for this is if you're a couple or a group that's traveling together, you can't use the same card for multiple people, right? Because you tap in and you tap again for the second person, but actually you're tapping out. And so each person in your group needs to have their own card, including families. If you're a family of 4, I hate to tell you, mom, dad, and the two kids all need tap cards if they want to ride transportation together. There are other options. You can book tickets on an app, you can go to a machine. But in the Netherlands, for example, this is such a major change. It's actually getting harder and harder to get tickets in other ways. So my point in all this is technology is making things more convenient and easier, but it also comes with a little bit of thinking about how it actually works and making sure you're prepared for it. And so if you're going to be using this tap to pay, think about the fact that you might need two different payment methods, for example, if you're two people traveling together. We talked about how things are so expensive in Europe. I just have a couple of favorite money changing tips. These days, I pay for almost everything with my tap card, but I do get a little bit of cash usually for the walking around money when I'm in the country. A big trend recently is it used to be most of the ATMs were operated by banks. And these days, more and more ATMs are operated by private exchange bureau companies. The biggest name is Euronet, which is actually an American company that makes all of its money basically ripping off Americans traveling and other people traveling around Europe. Here's what I want to say. If you're getting out cash from an ATM, it does make a difference whether you use an exchange ATM like this, kind of a generic ATM, or one that's affiliated with a bank. So if you're getting out cash from Europe, you want to look for an ATM that's affiliated with a local bank. Often it's actually embedded in the wall of the bank. But even if you're in a public place, just look for one that has a local bank logo. It makes a big difference. So I was in Krakow, Poland not long ago, and I did an experiment. I went to a bank ATM and I got 100 zloty, and I went to an exchange bureau ATM I also got 100 zloty. I paid 15% more at the exchange bureau ATM than I did at the bank ATM. So if you're taking out $200, that's $30 more you're paying for the $200 worth of local currency by choosing the wrong ATM. This is really frustrating because they're phasing out the bank ATMs. A lot of airports and train stations don't have bank ATMs anymore. They only have the private ATMs. So just train yourself, if you're frugal, if you're trying to save a little bit of money, train yourself to recognize the legitimate ATMs and the rip-off ATMs, and make sure you use the legitimate ATMs.
Yeah,
And then
Cameron,
the other thing that you're seeing a lot now these days, this has always happened a little bit, but now it's becoming ridiculously common. Almost every transaction, they ask you when you tap your card, would you like to pay in US dollars or in the local currency? Robyn, pop quiz. Which of these two would you like to pay your bill in?
100% of the time, you pay in local currency.
Oh, but Robyn, why would you not pay in US dollars? It's so convenient. They've gone to the trouble of converting it for you.
Yeah, they like to make it seem that way, and they even like to trick you and make you say decline paying in US dollars. Take your
So
time.
the dollars are the default unless you say
Yeah.
no thanks.
Yeah, so take your time, and you want to make sure that whatever you do, if you're ever offered the option, you want to pay in that local currency.
So everyone, drill this into your minds. Always choose the local currency, never choose dollars. The reason why is if you choose the local currency, your bank will decide what the rate is. If you choose dollars, you're accepting that ATM terminal's offer of their rate, which is always going to be a lot worse than what your bank will offer you. Just like I did with the ATM in Krakow, I've experimented with this, and I'm telling you, it can be 15, 20% different whether you choose the local currency, which you should do, or the US dollar, which you should not do. It's counterintuitive for Americans, I think, to not pay in dollars, but you do want to pay in the local currency.
Yeah, Cameron, I mean, $30 in Poland, that's a dinner for two.
Yeah, right. You could have a really nice dinner for the difference in fees based on one or the other. And then I'll just say quickly, there's a million tools out there. Just get comfortable. If you're not comfortable with technology, some of you probably are, some of you might not be. The more comfortable you get with technology, the happier you'll be, the smoother your trip will be. In Switzerland, for example, there's a great app that helps you figure out all your train connections, but also local bus and regional bus. And it'll tell you not only what time the train leaves, but it'll tell you if it's running late and how late it's running, and if you have to change and where you have to change. So get and use these apps on your phone. Increasingly, electronic tickets are very common. So you can either on a website or in an app, you can buy a train ticket. So rather than bothering with going to a machine or going to a ticket window, literally, I've done this many times, walking up the train platform, getting on the train and hitting purchase just as I'm walking on the train. So when the conductor comes, I can show my ticket. Same with museum tickets. Robyn was talking earlier about the importance of pre-booking tickets, reservations. Well, very often when you do that, you'll end up with an e-ticket with a code. You just walk right to the front of there's a long line of people waiting to buy old-fashioned paper tickets. And there's another entrance for people who've already bought tickets. And there's just a person there with a scanner. You just hold up your phone and scan it and you're in instead of having to wait in that line. Robyn and I were talking about this too, the other sort of technology thing, artificial intelligence, AI, boy, like that's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here. But I think the thing to know as a traveler is, of course, this is a real thing. It's a big thing. It's going to change our industry like it changes every other industry. To the extent that Robyn and I have experimented with this, it can be useful if you're smart about how to use it. It also has a lot of deficiencies. There can be a lot of problems with it. It can be inaccurate. It's soulless. You know, you don't have an actual human being going and figuring this stuff out and explaining it. So I would say if you want to try to use AI for some trip planning, just tread with caution. And we always recommend going to the source, you know, rather than typing into your AI, what's the train schedule for getting from Bern to Zurich in Switzerland? Just download the app and check yourself, because then that removes the possibility that the AI is going to get their wires crossed and tell you the wrong thing.
And Cameron, that's the SBB app, yeah? You're talking
That's
about
right. The Switzerland Rail app is SBB, which is the Swiss name for Switzerland Rail.
Since we mentioned it a couple times, and it is one of the better apps out there for transportation. Let's make sure we let folks know. The other thing you're going to see AI for is within European cities and within sites like museums. You might see now there are AI museum walking routes. So I think those are the kinds of good AI, right? When it's curated and created by the site or by the city itself. That's where we're going to see a growth in AI that's going to be useful for travelers. Well, we have a couple more topics to get through our trends and challenges presentation tonight. The next one, along with technology, is pretty important. This is all about red tape, what to expect if you're traveling to Europe in 2025. Some of these you may have heard of already. Some may be brand new to you. One of the things that's happening in Europe is something called the entry-exit system, and its acronym is EES. And the way to think about it is this. So normally when you go to Europe, you present your passport to a person and they stamp your passport with the date that when you entered. When you leave Europe, you go back, you go to the person, they stamp your passport again, showing the date that you're leaving Europe. The reason that they're doing this, aside from having a very colorful passport book full of cool stamps, is North American travelers who do not have a visa or a reason, an exemption to be in Europe longer, are only allowed to be in Europe, in the Schengen countries, for 90 days within a 180-day rolling period. Whew, very confusing, Cameron. I have had to do these calculations myself. Super confusing.
As have I.
Yes. So what the EES system is going to do is now when you arrive in Europe, you're going to scan your passport. It's going to be biometrically included the day that you were entering, the day that you're exiting, and all of that math is going to be done on the backside. We don't know when this is going to get rolled out. It has had, I don't know, half a dozen projected start dates. And the latest information that we know about the EES system is instead of all rolling out together, it's now projected to be like a six month ongoing rolling out country by country as countries are ready to inaugurate this system. That's only important because 6 months after the EES is live across all of Europe, we are going to experience something called ETIAS. And ETIAS is important for travelers. This is going to be the visa waiver program that allows North American travelers to enter Europe. Don't be scared. We still have a long time and we're going to put out lots of information about this. What you need to know is once this goes live, which is still at least 6 months after EES goes live, to which we have no date. So there's a lot of vagueness here. But ETIAS, once it goes live, travelers will have to register in advance online, pay a small fee, and then they will have this digital stamp in their passport saying they're allowed to enter Europe under the rules governed by Schengen. I think it's going to be €7, good for 3 years. So don't worry about it too much right now. We have no idea when it's going to go into place. We only know it's going to go into place 6 months after the entry-exit system is in place. And we don't even know when that's going to take place. So we keep updating it for the guidebooks online. We've done presentations about it. The more you know, the less you know, but you'll for sure hear the latest updates from us when we know more. The one you do need to think about is already in place, and this is in place for the United Kingdom. So England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. This is called the ETA. Lots of acronyms here. The ETA is the European Travel Authorization that allows you to go to or through the United Kingdom. This again is something that you apply for online. It costs £10. It's good for 2 years. I guess I should say both for ETIAS and for ETA. It's good, it's valid for 3 years or 2 years, or until your passport expires. So if your passport's going to expire in 2 months and you have a trip to the United Kingdom in 6 months, go ahead and wait to get your new passport, and then your ETA will be valid for 2 years. Like I said, this applies to people who are traveling to the UK or through the UK. An example of that is if you have a flight to Europe that's going to be have a layover in Heathrow Airport, you do have to apply for your ETA in advance. Now, there's going to be a lot more information about this on airline websites. We have good information about it as well, but it's not scary. The process for applying, you either do it online or via the ETA mobile application. I just did it. It took about 5 minutes to do. And although they say it takes up to 3 business days to get your results, I got mine in about 5 minutes. So really what you're looking at is spending about 10 minutes on a website or in the application, paying about $12, and then you're good to go for 2 years or until your passport expires. Cameron, I know that's a lot of information. Is there anything that you have questions about?
So let me just get this straight, because it's super confusing, and you're the master of it. I know you've attended conferences about this. Okay, so bottom line, if you're going to or through the United Kingdom, it's already happening. This is in place, and that's the
Correct.
ETA.
Correct.
The one for the European Union, the Schengen area, keeps getting delayed. It's very similar. That's not in place yet. Probably no sooner than maybe the end of this year, early next year.
Correct. The most recent thing is the entry-exit system will be a rolling release of 6 months. They haven't even said when that rolling release will begin. So if it
Okay.
started tomorrow, it wouldn't be done rolling for another 6 months.
6 months, okay. But the point is, either way, it's not scary. It's a 5 to 10 minute task on the internet. You upload your passport information. Maybe you take a picture of yourself. You give them your credit card to pay the small fee, and then you're good to go for 2 or 3 years, as many times as you want.
You're good to go.
Okay.
And this is something that, we do for travelers coming to America. That's something important to point out as well, that this has been around for a long time. The ESTA is what we ask foreign visitors coming into the United States to do. And it's just a way to keep everything in the system and make sure that people are who they say they are and that they are not overstaying their stay with us.
So bottom line, if you're going to the United Kingdom this year, you do have to do something soon before you go. If you're going to other parts of Europe this year, check back to see when that version is coming into effect.
Check back in 6 months or more.
Okay.
And then this is not really red tape, but it's important to know because we like to give you a lot of tips. When you're coming back to the United States, there are a couple ways that help speed you through customs and immigration. And one of the ways is through global entry, which you pay a fee for, you register, you give some information, and then you're allowed to use the global entry lanes in your first airport arrival back in the United States. And that's a great option. The other way lesser known option, and I love these tips, I think we're just like Rick Steves is on top of everything, is called the Mobile Passport Control. This is an app you can download onto your smartphone, and it is free. And the lines for Mobile Passport Control are almost as short as global entry, but it doesn't take anything except downloading the application, entering your information, taking a photo. That's all it requires. So I just like to share that as my tip for you traveling in 2025.
Man, that's a lot of really extremely important and helpful and kind of dense information. I really appreciate you sorting all of that out. You made it crystal clear. We have global entry, and it's great, and it means that when I get home from Europe, I just basically walk right through. It also includes TSA pre-check. So when you're traveling domestically, once you have global entry, you also have TSA pre-check, which is great. So we've been hitting you really hard with lots of facts and tips and big thought experiments, and we're going to finish here with a little inspiration, right? Because at the end of the day, this is all about traveling. And I think one of again, our topic is European trends. One of the trends that we've identified recently, especially post-COVID, people are a little less interested in going to specific big sites. They're more interested in experiences. And that's great for us because Rick Steves Europe has always been a really experiential travel company. But I wanted to just give you, just to kind of stoke your traveler's appetite, to get you excited, I want to give you a few examples of some of my favorite recent travel experiences that might help kind of seed ideas for yourself. And then Robyn's going to give, I think, some really interesting sort of philosophy around how to figure out what those experiences are for you. I mentioned Krakow, Poland, one of my favorite cities. One of my favorite activities in this city is actually something we do on our Rick Steves Poland tour. And it's a pierogi cooking class. Pierogi, of course, are those traditional Polish handmade dumplings. But it's not just any old pierogi cooking class. It's an experience. You meet a local person. They take you to the market. They teach you how to use the Polish phrases to order the ingredients for the pierogi. Then you go into a local home. You're not in a restaurant or a classroom. You're in a local home, and they teach you how to make pierogi hand-rolled exactly the way babcia used to make it, exactly the way grandma used to make it. This is an absolutely wonderful experience. I had a great time doing this on our Poland tour. Rick, actually, we're filming we're having a new Poland TV show coming out in a few weeks, and Rick actually filmed himself doing the same experience, which you'll see on national TV shortly. It's just a wonderful experience because you understand why pierogi is so important, why it's such a Polish staple, and you get to connect with local people and local culture in a very special way. Robyn, I think it's safe to say when we look at our reviews, this pierogi making experience on our Poland tour is one of the top rated experiences on any of our tours in anywhere in Europe. I mean, people just absolutely adore this, and there's a good reason why. When I think about other kinds of experiences, a lot of them have to do with farms or animals. I love this kind of stuff. In Ireland and Scotland both, I've gone to sheepdog demonstrations where you actually watch these wonderful, incredibly intelligent dogs who work in concert with the shepherd to herd the sheep. And then very often the shepherd will shear the sheep in front of the crowd, so you can kind of see how that works. In Ireland, I had a wonderful experience. Also something that we try to do with some of our Ireland tours. I got to learn about birds of prey, and not just learn about birds of prey, but I actually had one land on my gloved hand, and the trainer taught me how to launch the bird of prey off into the sky. It was an incredible experience. In Norway, for example, my wife and I went to a beautiful cidery on a fjord. They've been making hard cider in Norway since Viking Age, and there's this wonderful family that has a place where you can go and learn how they make the cider, do a cider tasting paired with some really amazing local food. If you're in Scotland, of course, you're going to see the Highland cattle, which locals call the hairy coos. And there's actually a farm in the Scottish Highlands where you can go and get really up close and personal with a farmer who raises hairy coos and get to know them in a really intimate way. It's just a wonderful experience. If you travel in Scotland, it's something that you'll never forget. So think about that in terms of like the possibility of nature or farm experiences, or think about what you're interested in. What excites you? I was an English major. I read Ulysses in college, James Joyce's Ulysses, and I always dreamed of going to Dublin on Bloomsday. Bloomsday is June 16th, which is the day that the story of Ulysses takes place. And every year in Dublin on June 16th, it's a citywide celebration of James Joyce. People come from all over the world. They dress in Edwardian costume, and you go all over the town, and there's all these different locations significant to Joyce, and you see all these people dressed up, and they do dramatized readings. And if you're in the right place at the right time, you're just surrounded by a sea of straw boater hats. And it's just one of my favorite experiences that I've had recently in Europe. So think about what makes you excited, what you're passionate about, something that you're interested in. For example, just this afternoon, we had a meeting with some folks in the office and realized it's the birthday this year of Jane Austen. I think 250th birthday, something like this. So there's going to be a lot of special Jane Austen activities in the UK this year. But Robyn's got we were talking about this in preparation for this talk, and Robyn actually blew my mind by the way she thinks about this. So tell us a little bit more about how people can kind of figure out what that thing is for them.
Yeah, Cameron, first I have to share a story. When you were talking about the pierogi making, it reminded me of years and years ago. I was not with the Rick Steves group. I was with a different group helping out a friend of mine, and their group was in Spain and they wanted to have a paella dinner. And they had this paella dinner in the basement of the hotel that they were sleeping in. And it was just like, are you kidding? One of the worst experiences that I've ever had eating a meal. And to see the pierogi just made me think about what a great experience that was. And really, the last part of our presentation here is this general shift. And this is a big trend as well. There's a growing trend that instead of thinking about traveling is, I want to go to Italy. Now, what is there to do? The trend is really on experiences. I want to see the Northern Lights. Now, where is the best place to see that? And applying that to the paella idea, it's like, I want to have authentic Spanish paella. Where's the best place to do that? And we see this with hikes. I want to go have a nature experience. And people are really diving more deep into the thing that inspires them or the thing that they want to do instead of the place that they want to go because they've always heard about it. And now what is there that I can connect with that I like? And this is a great transition to something we've already talked about earlier in the presentation, which is give yourself permission to skip the things that don't move you. Instead of finding all of the famous paintings in Europe or all of the famous sites and then expecting to be moved by them, go find the thing that's going to move you and be moved by it. This is the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, of course, and it's an incredible, important painting. But finding the art that moves you, and this is one of the portraits, I believe this is in the National Portrait Gallery in London, and that museum is incredible. Talk about the history of real people portrayed through portraits. The art that moves you, that makes you feel this emotion, it doesn't just have to be art, it can be anything. But to understand that there's more than just the Louvre, the Vatican, the Uffizi that has this magnificent art. And it's maybe not even in the museums themselves. Europe is full of art and culture and moving experiences that you can share. And really, the way I want to wrap this up is that if you focus on things that you're passionate about, you will open up yourself up to more moving experiences for the opportunity to have a trip that moves you. And I think that is both my and Cameron's number one tip for 2025 is find something that moves you and then go find the best place to experience it.
Boy, that's just so brilliantly said. And I keep thinking of examples, but one example is my wife and I decided when we go to Italy, we love to eat food. So instead of saying, I'm going to go to this town and then find food, the last couple of trips we said, where's the best food in Italy? And we have this Italy for Food Lovers book that we worked on in the pandemic. I got to work on that book quite a bit and I learned a lot about Italian food. And so the last couple of times we went to Italy, we went to Emilia Romagna and to Piedmont only because those are the places with the best food and wine in Italy. And it's exactly what you're describing. And I was thinking about Rick Steves, of course. Recently, he's been doing a lot of big hiking trips. He and his partner, his wife, his girlfriend, Shelly, they've gone on a couple of multi-day, like hiking around Mont Blanc. He just told us earlier today they're going to do a similar hike in the Dolomites coming up this year, I believe. But it's what you said. We want to go somewhere for a multi-day alpine hike to really be in nature. Now, where can we do that? It's a great strategy.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, the one thing we haven't covered, and we're wrapping up here, the one thing we haven't covered are what destinations are hot in Europe. And that's often, if we're talking about trends, that's kind of normally what people are pushing. Well, you got to go to Portugal because Portugal is hot. Well, if you've learned anything from our time together this evening, that's not how we think about things. Where you should go, not where it's hot. In fact, you could make a case to avoid the places that are hot if you want to avoid the crowds. Instead, you should go to a place that excites you. So, Robyn, are there any places either that you're planning on going to, not that are trendy, but that you're passionate about, either that you're already planning to go to or that you'd like to go to?
Yeah, no, you and I were talking about this earlier, and I think we have a country in common. I think we're both going to try to hit Lithuania this
Yep,
year.
Lithuania.
Yeah, Lithuania. More than that, though, something I love to do in Europe, and this is just something I really enjoy. I love going to hot springs. So anytime I'm in a city, if there's a hot springs, I'm going to go do it. But I might be more intentional about finding a kind of a relaxation resort retreat in Europe where I can enjoy the hot springs.
That is a great, I'm a fan too. That's a great idea. One place that's on my list, well, I want to go to more of Italy. I feel like I could throw a dart at a map of Italy and I could have a great experience anywhere. I want to go to more untouristy Italy towns. And then the other thing is I'm intrigued by Georgia, the country of Georgia. And it's because I love Georgian food. Anytime I go to a Georgian restaurant, it blows me away. So I have a travel friend, and he and I, every year we kind of talk about, is this the year we're going to go to Georgia? So we're not saying you should go to Georgia or you should go to Hot Springs or that you should go to Lithuania. But it's just to demonstrate that who cares what's trendy in terms of destination? The real trend is you should go to a place that you are passionate about.
Definitely.
All right, Lisa, bring us on home here.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that information-packed, almost 90 minutes. I wanted to say first and foremost that we do have a winner for our Europe Through the Back Door book, and this is going to go out to K, last initial D, from Shreveport, Louisiana. So we will contact you. Gabe will contact you tomorrow and let you know how to receive that book. So thank you everyone for entering. And then we had lots and lots of questions. So even though we're running a little bit late, but that was a lot of really great information, I do want to ask a few questions. So Cynthia asks, Albania and Serbia have cautions for travelers from the State Department, but can you comment on whether you would go there?
You know, everyone has to make their own decisions. I did go there recently. The State Department has cautions and warnings for a variety of reasons. Some of them are really serious and should be heeded. Some of them are more precautions. Everyone needs to make their own decisions. I will say I've been to the places I went. Some of them had not, high level warnings, but sort of take extra caution kind of warnings, and I felt extremely safe. I would say that's a trend. A lot of folks who travel in the Balkans, that's one of their big takeaways, is it feels very, very safe in the Balkans. I've heard it said by many travelers, in some ways, it's the safest feeling part of Europe in terms of being a traveler. But that stuff needs to be taken into consideration and weighed carefully.
Robyn, as a female traveler, would you concur?
Oh yeah, actually, I remember going to Belgrade and I was an independent female traveler getting picked up at the airport at midnight. And I was like, yep, everything's great. It was not a worry, not a care in the world.
Great. I like to get both of your takes on that. Thank you. Let's see. Joel asked this question, and I thought this would be a good time for you guys to answer. Why isn't there a Rick Steves book on some of these other places that you're recommending?
I mean, as I mentioned, we are working that way. So that's why we're adding some of those Greek islands, for example. Look, we really love the kind of mainline destinations that we've been covering for years. And in our books, we already cover a variety of mainstream big destinations and lesser known ones. For example, Lucca, the town I was telling you, is so great in Italy. Of course, that's covered in our Italy guidebook. We also, Rick's always been about teaching people how to make their own discoveries. If Rick, we were talking about the Europe Through the Back Door book, which we just gave away. That's been around for 40 some years, 45 years, I think. And from first edition to the current edition, there's a strong admonition to say, hey, folks, I'm going to tell you some of my favorite places, but you need to find your favorite places too. We really appreciate the fact that people treat Rick Steves' book like the Bible. And if it's not, we've been told, Robyn and I both been told as researchers, people will say, can you please tell people it's okay to go to this other town? It's not in the book, so they won't go there. We appreciate that people take Rick's advice so seriously that if Rick doesn't cover it, I don't want to go. But I think if Rick were here, he would say, we love to guide you when you're in a place that we do cover, but that's not to say you shouldn't go to the other places.
Yeah, it's not meant to be comprehensive at all. I mean, one of my favorite places in Switzerland is not in our guidebook, not because it doesn't muster, but because on a average 2-week American vacation, it's the place that I love is called Engelberg, and it's sort of a duplicate of an even better, bigger place called Lauterbrunnen Valley. And it's like if you love the Lauterbrunnen Valley and you have a short vacation, don't go to Engelberg also, because it's just going to be more of the same. So yeah, it's not meant to be comprehensive.
I'm gonna add one more little note about that. What was it just flew out of my head. Never mind.
I want to interject.
Oh, I know what it was. One of our Italy guidebook researchers once said to me, our Italy book it's the best-selling guidebook in America. It's huge. It's 1,200 pages, and it covers a lot of stuff. One of our guidebook researchers once said to me, you could do a second Italy book that doesn't cover anything else, anything the same, a whole other 1,200 pages on other parts of Italy, and it would be just as good as the first book. We're not going to sell you a 2,400 page book, right? So we've chosen our best, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot of other great stuff there.
I want to break it down, and I'm sorry for interjecting my own agenda here into this question, but I want to break it down that we have different types of books, and we have pocket books, and we have best of books. So if you've got the best of Italy book, it's going to give you what we really think are the best 2 weeks. But if you buy this monster 1,200 page book, it's got Bonasola and Levanto, and it's got a lot of these places that don't see a ton of crowds. So you just have to, you want to get these big, beautiful, giant books that have a ton of information in them, because you guys worked so hard doing your guidebook research that those books are the best information out there anywhere. That's what I would say about that.
Well, thank you.
It's true. Let's see. You guys are also both super, super well traveled in Germany. So I wanted to ask this. Juliana is traveling with her 8-year-old granddaughter, and she's hoping that you might give her an idea or two about a good, friendly location somewhere between Hamburg and Venice.
Oh, between Hamburg and, well, Hamburg itself is a fantastic Hanseatic town that they can visit. Northern Germany is pretty spread out, so really focusing either on, I mean, Berlin is a 2.5 hour train ride from Hamburg, and then you kind of, if you go too much further south, then you're kind of on the Fairy Tale Road and the Harz Mountains, and you really have to go quite a ways. There is a great train that connects Berlin and Munich now in a couple hours as well. I know I'm persuading her to go further down south, but
I mean, you really can't go wrong. There's, I mean, almost all of Germany is between Hamburg and Venice.
yeah.
We've a classic, speaking of the Rick Steves classics, Rothenburg ob der Tauber is the best preserved walled medieval town in Germany. It's a living fairy tale. We take our best of Europe tours there. Wonderful, wonderful, just kind of, if you want classic Germany, Rothenburg, and it's along a road called the Romantic Road, which is basically a whole string of those towns. And there's a whole chapter, of course, in the guidebook about that. So that might be, if you want kind of, again, classic fairy tale Germany, that might be a starting point.
Yeah, as well as Dresden or Erfurt. Erfurt is
Erfurt. I was thinking of Erfurt. Yeah.
That's
What's there to do that's kid friendly in Erfurt?
they have that cartoon, the cartoon
That's
character.
right. Yes, Kika or whatever. Yes, there's a famous German cartoon that's based in Erfurt.
I think the nice thing about Erfurt too is you're close to Wartburg Castle, so you could go visit that. There's a lot of wide open spaces. They've got the old bridge, and the fun little guy that you put. I'm hand signaling here. You put the money in and you crank the lever.
Oh yeah. There's I know what you mean. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. And if the granddaughter is really into Martin Luther and the Reformation, they're gonna just love Erfurt.
You're so ding dang dry. You kill me. Amy wants to know, do you all travel with a laptop or just a phone?
Well, we're working, so we have a laptop.
Yeah, laptop.
If I were, gosh, I don't know when I've ever traveled and not worked. If I were not working, I would just travel with my phone.
Agreed.
Phone would be enough. Maybe an iPad.
Yeah, well, an iPad's a good compromise.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of things like iPads, Christina wants to know, could you just speak for a moment about SIM cards and phones? If we're talking about connectivity, you guys brought up tech. How do you deal with being connected over there?
I mean, I can take this, Cameron, or you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's a lot different than it was even 10 years ago, where now you don't necessarily need to buy a SIM card or change your SIM card. What might be economically better and more efficient is to go to your provider's website and activate some kind of a global calling or global data. Either you can pay by the day, or you can get like a 1 week or a 2 week or a 30-day kind of a thing. I know when I'm traveling, I get the 30-day, and I think it's about $50, $60. And then I have international calling, texting, and a good amount of data.
And I will also mention a SIM card, by the way, if you don't know, is the little chip that you put in your phone that gives you a local phone number. The other thing that's changed is now there's eSIM cards. So rather than having to buy a physical card that you physically insert in your phone, you can go online and buy a virtual SIM card basically that works the same way. So that it makes it, Robyn, you probably, and Lisa, I know you too, we've probably spent a lot of time in newsstands when we first arrive in a new European country buying the local SIM card. I have a whole bag of them. It's like a bag of sunflower seeds or something. And now it's all electronic.
Yeah, I'm using eSIMs these days because I like a lot of data. Let's see. But staying in this theme, Latha wants to know, are there security issues that you should keep in mind if you're using your phone to pay for a lot of things or having your credit card out all the time?
The tap to pay, it's complicated, but the technology they use is quite safe. It has to do with a token. There's a whole complicated technology to it. But the reason it's so popular is because it's quite safe. Anytime you're flashing your phone or your credit card, you need to be a little bit cautious. I don't worry about it too much. Robyn, what do you think about
Yeah,
that?
I would say the one thing that Europe does differently or is more advanced than the United States is they do a multi-factor authentication more often than we're used to. And what a multi-factor authenticate oh my God, it's been more than 90 minutes. I can't talk. Authentication is what that means is that if you're paying for something, the person that you're paying or the site that you're paying is going to want to know that it's really you, and they'll send you a text or an email with a code that you have to put in to finalize the transaction. We're not as used to that here in the United States, but in Europe that's pretty prevalent.
Also, there is a device that I got for my daughter when she went to Belize, and this is a $5 wrist strap. So if I'm paying for things with my phone, I just have this on. And if I'm taking a picture over a bridge and I drop it, I'm safe. So
And by the way, if you have a smartwatch, you can pay with your watch. I know a lot of people who, when they get on the bus, they don't take a card or a phone out. They just have their watch set up so they can pay for their bus ticket on their phone, on their watch.
Oh, that is the best. Okay, David wants to know, with crowds, would you recommend purchasing tickets from Get Your Guide, as some sites only sell tickets weeks or months ahead of time? I see this a lot, the Get Your Guide and can you talk about that?
Local, yeah.
I know, neither of us are, yeah.
Local guides hate Get Your Guide, to be honest. I mean, very candidly, because there's a markup involved, and they're kind of a middleman. The problem is if sites are very limited and they're sold out, that can be the only way to get. Is that right, Robyn? There's certain sites that might sell out 6 months ahead.
Yeah. And there was actually like a study, a webinar I was in that was saying that people are more likely now than ever to spend more money securing tickets to a site than they ever have been. And it's, on the one hand, it's nice, the availability of it. On the other hand, it is gouging, right? Like my best friend used to her kids and her husband, and they had 2 days in Rome, and their kids really wanted to see the Colosseum, and it was completely sold out. So they paid a lot because they really wanted to see it. The other thing you can do, especially, I mean, at the Colosseum or at the Vatican in particular, if just the entrance ticket, the cheapest version, is sold out, you might be able to get a ticket that includes a guided tour. And it might be a little bit pricier, but it's not going to be nearly as expensive as the Get Your Guide option. And then what you do is you just skip the tour, and they know that you might do that. So it's not, I had to do that in Rome for entering the Vatican. I paid 40 euros instead of whatever it would have been 25 or 30. And I just met at the right time to get my ticket, and I told the local guide, hey, I'm just going to do this on my own. And she's like, great, have a nice time. So there's little tips that you can do that you might not have to resort to Get Your Guide.
Yeah, I mean, folks, the tip is get your tickets direct well in advance. If it's a really popular site like the Vatican Museums, especially this year is a Jubilee year, figure out 6 months ahead, when do those tickets go on sale? Get them as quickly as you can, because if you miss your window to get those tickets, you have a lot of bad options, including just skipping the site. It's all going to be resellers. I will also say Get Your Guide we're using that, I think, generically for these reselling companies. That's the most dominant one. If you're buying a ticket from a third party, it's very risky because you do hear about some of them are legitimate. You pay a lot, but you get what you wanted. Some of them are just total ripoff outfits. So I would just be really careful to vet. Make sure you understand what you're getting, that you're really getting the thing you want to get, and that you're doing it with a reputable reseller.
Hot off the presses, I don't have the exact details about this, but I know that Pompeii, the archaeological site of Pompeii, is going to start requiring reservations,
Hmm.
and you can
Oh,
get them online. So if you have,
that is a hot tip. I didn't know
I
that either.
know,
Wow.
yeah.
Huh.
So if you have a trip planned down to the Amalfi Coast in Italy, and you think you're going to go visit the site of Pompeii, go online, go to their website directly, and see if your day or your time is available.
And that's the kind of up-to-date information we're slinging here at Rick Steves. One last question, a little bit more of a dreamy question. Joanna asks, if you're able to travel potentially any time of year, where and what time of year?
Huh.
I mean, I think it depends on all the things that we've just talked about. I mean, do you mind crowds? Do you mind heat? Do you have a particular thing you're interested in, a festival or whatnot? In general, the least amount of crowds you'll experience will be in that late fall, kind of late October, early November through Christmas. A lot of European countries go big during Christmas all the way through Epiphany, which is January 6th. But for the most part, late October, early November, early December, or leading up until April, like February, March. But again, you got to be careful about Easter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wide open question. Easter, I'm glad you said Easter. Easter is a really busy time for Europeans to travel. So one good tip for Italy, this place where we went in Tuscany that I mentioned in November. I once asked the woman who runs that place, Isabella. I said, "What's the best time to come to Tuscany?" And she kind of conspiratorially, "Well, I'll tell you. It's like early May because it's crazy at Easter because all the Italians and other Europeans are coming in for the 2 weeks around Easter. And then there's this little lull at the end of April or the beginning of May, and then it starts to pick up kind of the summer season and you get to the latter half of May. And I think a lot of destinations have that kind of optimal window. But it takes, in our guidebooks, if there is such a thing, we make a point to tell you what that is and give you that strategy. We're always thinking strategically when we're writing these guidebooks. It's, this is the best time to go. This time works, but it's going to be more crowded, more hot, or whatever. Especially the early part of the chapter, there's a planning your time section where we kind of talk through that. But yeah, I think each place has a sweet spot, and I would say I think for me my favorite time of year in Europe is often very end of March, April through early May, except be aware that Easter can kind of create headaches.
Yeah, and Easter is more intense in certain places than others. I mean, Spain
Yeah.
and Easter, whoo boy, but
Yeah.
maybe not in Germany as much or something. I would like to thank you both very much for joining us and for giving our audience so much great information today. Cameron, you're going to be back talking about the Balkans in the next few weeks on Monday Night Travel. And Robyn, you're going to be back next week with Italy, this or that. And I would like to remind people that if they want more of this content for sort of off the beaten path places, we have the Monday Night Travel team tomorrow night talking about Europe's great second cities. So please join us for that.